Hello and welcome to Let's Talk, a series of podcasts produced by the Hazel and Betty Ford Foundation on the issues that matter to us and the issues that matter to you too. Issues related to prevention, research, addiction, treatment, and recovery support. I'm your host, William Moyers, and today I'm joined by the Chief Medical Officer of the Hazel and Betty Ford Foundation, Dr. Marvin Seppala. Marv, welcome.
Thanks, William.
Good to have you with us again today because our topic today is one that you know very closely from your own personal journey and also from your expertise as an addiction doc, psychiatrist, and that's on the fact that addiction is an illness of the mind and the body and the spirit. And today we want to talk about spirit. So what does it mean when we talk about addiction as a spiritual malady?
Yeah, I think of it as a disease of the soul. Our lives are in the balance. We may die, we may not. And from a neurobiological basis, which we discussed in a neurobiology examination of addiction for different podcasts, we're being driven by a reward center that just wants that drug. And it's been reprioritized to seek that drug and that high rather than attend to even life itself. Survival-based behaviors are not as important as continued use of the drug once addiction takes hold. And so we're out of control. We're risking our lives to continue drug use, and we don't recognize it, and we don't stop. And that to me is a soul disease. And the American Society of Addiction Medicine, ASAM, they define addiction as a disease of mind, body, and spirit.
So you mean spirit has a place in medicine and in science?
It's one of the wonderful things about working in addiction is you can actually talk about that, and it does have a place, and I think in a real important place because of that loss of control. So in the midst of my own use, that loss of control drove me to do things I never had otherwise done in my life. Illegal activities and all those things that I was so ashamed of, that I couldn't even talk about it, so guilty over. And so many of us have that, right, when we start to address our recovery. And that stuff keeps us using because it's so painful. And it's getting over those things that allow us to start looking at life so much differently.
Right.
If there was suddenly, a magic pill, or, let's say that we figured out addiction from a neurobiologic perspective, and you could give somebody this pill that would relieve their addiction and their craving, and they wouldn't ever use again. Well, they'd still have all this shame and guilt and all this stuff about their use and all the things they did. It wouldn't relieve that. And for some people, maybe that'd be enough. For somebody like me, that wasn't enough at all. That abstinence itself was almost like torture because I could actually think about all those things really frequently, those things that brought me to hate myself. And in recovery, I found means in my own journey through 12-step programs to address those issues, and it was addressed with a spiritual focus.
So if addiction is an illness of the mind and the body and the spirit, you alluded to the fact that recovery must address not just the mind and not just the body, but also must address the spirit.
I believe so, and 12-step programs do that. Refuge recovery uses a Buddhist orientation to do that. A lot of different means of addressing life are spiritual in focus.
Creativity can do that. Yeah, exercise can do that. It's whatever you find that you can hold on to that gives you that sense of hope, that sense of purpose, that sense of wellness. That's all spirituality.
It is all spirituality, and it drives people to change, to try and improve upon their lives in all those spheres, in all those areas, and in relationships especially. 'Cause I think of addiction also as a disease of isolation.
Yes.
We don't want to be around don't want to let anyone know what's really going on. I couldn't admit to what was really going on, and certainly not admit to how I felt and how much I hated myself. And to be able to get past that doesn't improve. That sort of healing doesn't happen without interacting with other human beings.
Right.
And addressing that void in a way that's positive, that starts to establish good relationships and integrity and honesty again, and love itself.
I've often talked about it as it manifests itself in my mind, body, and spirit. I always called it a hole in the soul, a sense that I wasn't good enough or I needed to be better than. And what I've discovered in my long recovery journey, as imperfect as it's been at times, is that I best can fill that hole in the soul with that community of helping other people, carrying that message and giving back in a way that fills this spiritual void.
I think about entering recovery. So I went to treatment at 17 as a high school dropout, and I didn't get sober till 19. And when I finally walked into a 12-step meeting, there were 3 guys there, all over 70. I was 18 at the time. And I don't know what they said. I was there out of pure desperation. I had been through treatment. I knew I needed to stop using, and I was afraid I was going to die. I was afraid I was going to lose this good job I had. I finally kind of got it, that was the crux of the issue. And desperation isn't lasting. And I went back a week later to the same meeting, the same 3 guys, and I kept going on that Sunday morning. And I think I went because of them and the connection they made with me and the hope they offered. Yeah, and the relationships. I think that they loved me. They cared enough about me when I could not care for myself. And in a lot of ways, I think of that as absolute spiritual connection with another human being, that gave me something I couldn't see in myself.
And yet, when we talk about spirituality, some people can rear back. They're averse to the whole notion of it because they see it as a requirement that you believe in a higher power that starts with the letter G, or that somehow you've got to be a church-going, recovering person, or you got to believe in that higher power stuff. It's not about that, is it?
No, it's not. And it's, the difficulty, I think, lies in the 12-step literature itself, where they do actually use that capital G, God, and talk about a higher power in a real Christian format. And yet even the founders at that time, and we published a book in regard to how the big book of AA called Alcoholics Anonymous was written, and they recognized that to address that program at its earliest sort of point from a religious standpoint would turn off a lot of people, and they wouldn't be able to get the healing that could occur in those programs. And they eliminated a lot of it, but they didn't eliminate it entirely. And it was built, it was written back in the 30s.
Right.
So they thought they'd done a great job. Well, now we look at it and we say, well, there's still all the stuff that makes it look religious. And people that have had difficulties with religion, or are agnostic or atheist or whatever, but just don't want to involve themselves in religion, still can be biased by that and see it as something that eliminates their ability to involve themselves, which is the exact opposite of what the founders intended. They tried to actually eliminate it to allow all those people in with any kind of belief that something outside themselves could play a role in their lives, and that something could just be the group itself, the other people, those relationships, a way of understanding the world that I'm not running the show. And when we talked about the neurobiology of alcohol, we're not running the show. If this is a disease of the soul, part of it's because, we've done things in the course of addiction driven by this part of the brain, and we've actually done them and carried them out and can't explain why, don't have a clue why. And yet now the neurobiology tells us, well, of course you did that because, dopamine's overriding the entire system, and you were driven. Your brain was hijacked. And to be able to take that in and understand it in a way that says, yeah, it really wasn't me making those decisions, and yet I'm so frightened to go back there. that to get involved with another group of people of a like mind, that care enough about each other to say, hey, if you keep doing this, whatever this is, you may not have to keep using anymore. I did it. You can too. And I heard that over and over.
So you're the Chief Medical Officer of the Hazel and Betty Ford Foundation. You're a psychiatrist. You're a member of the American Society of Addiction Medicine. You've got 42 plus years walking this walk a day at a time. How do you bring all of that together in helping that still suffering alcoholic or that new patient in treatment? How do you bring it all together to help them address their own spiritual bankruptcy or their own spiritual needs?
That spiritual need I think of as a void, and you speak to that. And we need to work to fill that void, but we need to do it with a language that people can accept, first of all, and understand in some ways. And there's a new subgroup of psychologists that have started a body of research and science associated with the positive emotions. The positive emotions are not positive thinking. It's about, joy, love itself, awe and wonder, those emotional experiences that are so positive in nature. And it looks as though the positive emotions themselves help us heal. They help us think broader, because you think of when you're angry, you're usually just focused on whatever you're angry on and can hardly think of anything else, just kind of can't even get out of the argument with your spouse or, or whatever, because you're angry. You can't think clear enough to get out of it. And yet when you're really in a loving interaction, it's like things just open up. We're more creative under those circumstances. And those are two extremes, but it kind of makes the point that the positive emotions drive really good things. And in fact, brain scanning studies show that when two people are interacting with loving intent for the other person, that their brains light up almost identically. And the benefits actually occur in both, which means that it occurs exponentially as it goes out to all the people they're involved with, which is a wonderful way of thinking about spirituality, that it has to do with these positive emotions that are a result of interactions with other human beings at a really, deep and meaningful level.
Particularly relative as it relates to what you said earlier about addiction being an illness of isolation. And so the antidote to it is precisely that.
Sure is. I'm a little concerned about some of the online means of interacting, because some of this love research that's being done actually shows that it doesn't work unless you're in proximity to the other person. So it doesn't work online, doesn't really work that well by phone, but it does work when you're face to face. And I still think we should be doing online services, no question about it, but there's a question I do have about it.
Sure.
Is it enough? Is it enough for those people that are so isolated? And somehow we have to make sure that they get that piece, that they get out to meetings or do other things to interact with other human beings, whatever that may mean, so that they get that piece and don't miss out of that and maintain, this isolated existence, which I think would contribute to potential relapse.
We only have about a minute left, but since we're on this subject and you've talked about your own experience, just close us out here by talking about the evolution of your spiritual journey and its relevance today like it was relevant back 42, 43 years ago when you were 19 years old.
Early on, I was attracted to people who expressed spirituality and expressed it in a way that was really about how they interacted with other people. They cared about one another, and that's what I wanted. I didn't really, I only recognized it in retrospect. I knew I was attracted to those folks. I didn't know why until I looked back on it. And yet there's research about 12-step programs actually and how they work. And it says that people will endorse spirituality as the most important part of their recovery But when they do the research, they don't find aspects of spirituality until a few years into recovery, right? So it's not like I was suddenly spiritual. It was more like I was attracted to spirituality and in others. And that's what kept me going and kept me sober and kept me wanting to, improve upon my life and do those things necessary to, get honest and actually go to college and start taking care of myself physically and mentally and spiritually.
And today you've done all those things over this time. And its relevance today, what is it today?
I think what's happened, that love itself has become even more important to me, and treating other people well has become even more important to me. And I've recognized that all these lessons all along that I got out of 12-step programs that can be gotten out of any of the perennial philosophies, right? Any kind of spiritual practice. I was able to build upon and use to develop a whole new life as a result of my addiction. And of course it goes up and down. Sometimes I'm doing that and doing it well. I like one of the features of one of the steps in AA that talks about maintaining a constant contact. And to me, that's like an ideal that can't be met. How can it be constant? And as a result, moving toward it, that's a wonderful thing. And the more I do it, the better off I live, and the better I feel, and I think the better I serve mankind.
And you do serve mankind, and we are so grateful that you have the present that you have to be able to talk about the science of the mind and the body, the science of the addiction, and also to talk about recovery with that spiritual piece that is as relevant as the science of the mind and the body are. So Dr. Seppala, thank you for joining us today and for sharing your own experience in that journey that one day at a time has added up to a remarkable career and a journey that's very inspiring to all of us. Thanks, Marv.
Thanks, William.
And thanks to all of you for joining us for another edition of Let's Talk, a series of podcasts that talks about the issues that really matter to us as an organization and we know matter to you too. Thank you very much.